Today, we are examining an important discussion that continues to attract attention among Iraqi Dinar followers and currency investors: the historical value of the Iraqi Dinar, the impact of Iraq's difficult economic history since 2003, and the question of whether an exchange rate from decades ago can tell us what the dinar should be worth today. The central point in this discussion is straightforward but extremely important. A historical exchange rate does not automatically establish the appropriate value of a currency in the present day. Exchange rates change because economic conditions change. Inflation, monetary policy, foreign reserves, government finances, trade flows, productivity, political stability, banking conditions, and confidence in the financial system all influence the value of a currency. The discussion provided for today points to a historical exchange rate of around $3.22 per Iraqi dinar in 1991. That historical figure is frequently mentioned in conversations surrounding the Iraqi dinar. However, it is essential to understand what that number actually represents. A currency's exchange rate at one particular point in history cannot simply be transferred into the present and treated as a guaranteed future value. The Iraqi economy of the early 1990s was operating under circumstances that were very different from those facing Iraq in 2026. Iraq subsequently experienced wars, international sanctions, political upheaval, major disruptions to infrastructure, changes in government institutions, and significant transformations in its monetary and banking systems. These developments affected economic activity and the country's relationship with international financial markets. That history matters because currencies are ultimately connected to economic conditions. When an economy experiences major structural changes, its monetary system and exchange rate framework can also change. Therefore, looking at an old exchange rate without examining the conditions surrounding that rate can create a misleading impression. This is particularly important for Iraqi dinar followers because online discussions sometimes focus heavily on a specific historical number while giving less attention to the economic mechanisms that determine currency values today. A serious analysis has to look beyond the number itself. Consider the broader economic transformation Iraq has experienced since 2003. The country has had to rebuild infrastructure, strengthen public institutions, modernize its banking sector, improve financial transparency, and reconnect its financial system with international standards. These are not changes that can be completed overnight. They are long-term processes, and their success can influence the country's economic stability and the credibility of its financial system. Iraq also remains highly dependent on oil revenues. That means global oil prices, export volumes, government spending, fiscal management, and external balances can have an important influence on the country's economy. When oil revenues are strong, the government has greater fiscal capacity. When oil prices weaken, pressure on government finances can increase. For the Iraqi dinar, this creates an important distinction between economic strength and exchange rate policy. A stronger economy does not automatically mean that the central bank will immediately establish a dramatically different exchange rate. Monetary authorities have to consider inflation, liquidity, reserves, financial stability, and the overall functioning of the banking system. This is why followers should be cautious whenever they see claims suggesting that a historical rate proves that the dinar must return to exactly the same level. History can provide useful context, but it is not a mathematical guarantee. The discussion also highlights something that is often overlooked. Purchasing power and exchange rates are not the same thing. If a currency was worth a certain amount of dollars decades ago, that does not mean maintaining exactly the same nominal exchange rate would necessarily produce the same economic outcome today. Over several decades, prices, wages, production costs, international trade relationships, and monetary conditions can change significantly. The value of money is affected by these developments. Therefore, comparing a historical exchange rate directly with a modern exchange rate requires careful economic analysis. For investors and currency followers, the most useful question is not simply, what was the dinar worth in 1991? A more meaningful question is, what economic conditions would have to exist for a substantially different exchange rate to be sustainable today? That question moves the discussion from speculation toward measurable economic indicators. Among those indicators are foreign exchange reserves, inflation, money supply, fiscal policy, oil revenues, imports and exports, banking sector development, international financial integration, and confidence in the domestic currency. Improvements in these areas can strengthen economic fundamentals, but the timing and size of any exchange rate adjustment remain decisions for monetary authorities. In the short term, this means Iraqi dinar followers should pay close attention to official statements from the Central Bank of Iraq, developments in banking reforms, government economic policy, and changes in Iraq's external financial position. These indicators provide considerably more useful information than social media claims based solely on historical exchange rates. Another important issue is the difference between redenomination, revaluation, and a change in the market exchange rate. These concepts are often mixed together online. A redenomination can involve changing the numerical units of a currency, while a revaluation refers to an official increase in the value assigned to a currency within an exchange rate framework. A market-driven appreciation is something different. Again, understanding these distinctions is critical because a change in the number printed on a banknote, the removal of zeros, or a change in accounting units does not automatically mean holders have received a massive increase in real purchasing power. For the average Iraqi dinar follower, the long-term story is therefore more complicated, but also more meaningful. Iraq has substantial economic resources, a large oil sector, a young population, and significant potential for infrastructure and private sector development. If financial reforms continue successfully and economic diversification improves, the foundations of the Iraqi economy could become stronger over time. But stronger fundamentals do not necessarily produce a specific exchange rate, such as $1 per dinar or several dollars per dinar. The eventual exchange rate outcome would depend on the policies adopted by Iraqi authorities and the economic conditions supporting those policies. This is where responsible analysis becomes especially important. There is a legitimate difference between saying that Iraq has economic potential and saying that a specific exchange rate is guaranteed. The first can be supported by economic evidence. The second requires information that is not available unless the appropriate authorities officially announce such a policy. The historical reference to $3.22 is therefore best viewed as a piece of historical context rather than a forecast. It tells us that the dinar has existed under very different exchange rate conditions in the past. It does not by itself tell us where the currency should trade in 2026 or where it will trade in the future. In the short term, the key developments to watch include official monetary policy decisions, banking sector reforms, inflation trends, foreign reserves, fiscal conditions, oil market performance, and Iraq's integration with international financial systems. These developments can provide a clearer picture of whether the country's economic foundation is improving. In the long term, sustainable economic growth would depend on much more than an exchange rate adjustment. Iraq's ability to expand non-oil industries, improve infrastructure, strengthen private sector investment, modernize financial institutions, and create greater confidence in the banking system could have a deeper impact on economic stability. For Iraqi dinar followers, that is perhaps the most important takeaway from this discussion. The story of the dinar should not be reduced to one historical exchange rate number. Iraq's economic journey since 2003 has been complex, and its future monetary direction will depend on measurable economic reforms and official policy decisions. So, when evaluating claims about the Iraqi dinar, always ask what evidence supports the claim. Is there an official central bank announcement? Is there a documented change in monetary policy? Are economic fundamentals supporting the proposed valuation? Or is the argument based primarily on a historical exchange rate? Those questions can help separate genuine economic developments from unsupported expectations. The Iraqi dinar remains a currency worth watching because Iraq remains an important energy-producing economy with significant long-term economic potential. But potential should not be confused with certainty. A stronger future for Iraq is possible, but the exact path of the dinar will depend on economic policy, financial reforms, market conditions, and decisions made by the country's monetary authorities. For anyone following the Iraqi dinar as a possible investment, patience and independent research remain essential. Historical performance does not guarantee future results, and no specific exchange rate should be treated as guaranteed simply because it existed decades ago. As we continue watching Iraq's economy, the focus should remain on facts, official monetary policy, banking reforms, economic growth, inflation, reserves, fiscal developments, oil revenues, and international financial integration. Those are the signals that can help us understand where Iraq's financial system may be heading. Thank you for watching Iraqi Dinar News. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video for responsible and factual updates on the Iraqi dinar, Iraq's economy, and important developments in the international currency market. Remember, this content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. Always conduct your own research and consult a qualified financial professional before making any investment decision.